Who's got two thumbs and accidentally deleted the intro footage yesterday? This girl. Welcome back, or if you're here for the first time, get out while you still can. Since you saw me last, we have had a fun thing here in Chicago called the polar vortex, where the weather outside was a balmy 30 below. Also on Tumblr, you guys have been reblogging and liking and commenting on things, and even here on YouTube I've gotten a couple new subscribers, which is crazy and awesome. So thank you all very, very much for that. It really means a lot. The validation! Enough dilly-dallying. Let's get into that fanfiction. This first one is a Harry Potter AU. And bitch, it is just the Sorting Hat ceremony because I am not here to write you a 7-book series on the dead poet's zany madcap hijinks at Hogwarts. I'm getting paid for literally none of this, and I am most certainly not getting paid for that. In terms of our little dead poet society, I think Neil and Cameron are definitely purebloods, and then everybody else is like half-bloods, or like Harry and Ginny Potter's kids, where they're like 3/4 bloods. Except for our boy Todd, who's a muggle-born. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson have one son at Welton and one at Hogwarts. Well, as long as it doesn't cost anything, then sure. Todd can go ahead and fuck off to his magical school in Scotland. We got Jeff to worry about. Todd knows fuck all about the wizarding world, and he rides on the Hogwarts Express alone, but he does hear some of the conversations that the other first years are having, and it's mostly about the Sorting Hat ceremony and which houses all of the other students want to get into, and the general consensus that Todd can pick up on is Hufflepuff is lame, Gryffindor is cool, Ravenclaw's the smart people, and Slytherin is something that he'll just never be a part of ever. And look, I love Hufflepuff as much as the next person, but like, these are judgmental 11-year-olds. And speaking of, can we just imagine all of these boys as 11-year-olds, please? Can we, 1 second, please? Like, Pitsy hasn't hit his growth spurt yet, but you know he's gonna be like 6 feet tall by the end of his 3rd year. And little Meeks, with his freckles and his curly red hair and his glasses, which would be too big for his face. Todd with his chubby little cheeks and baby blue eyes, and Neil would look like a model in like a family magazine. So all the first years are filing into the Great Hall. Todd is keeping his head down, trying to attract as little attention as possible in typical Todd fashion, until he feels somebody nudge him. He looks up to see an absurdly cute brunette guy staring at him. The boy just says to him, "Hey, have you seen the ceiling?" Todd, of course, being a muggle-born, is used to absolutely nothing around him, and he's in awe of everything that he sees ever in the wizarding world, but he feels really self-conscious about, like, gazing in wonder at all the splendors of Hogwarts because he feels like he looks like an idiot when he's doing that. He thinks if he does that, it's just like writing muggle-born on his forehead or something, like everybody can tell. Anyway, Todd's taking in the beautiful night sky ceiling, and Neil says something like, you know, I thought there was something magical on the floor, you were staring at it for so long. Todd's like, oh, great. This incredibly cute guy was looking at me for an extended period of time. My favorite. Fortunately, our boy Todd isn't suffering for long because McGonagall starts to read out names. Neil goes up, the hat is placed upon his head, and shocker, ya boy's a Gryffindor. He's like, well, it wasn't Slytherin like Dad was hoping, but hey, at least it isn't Hufflepuff. Same goes for Charlie. He has a total Draco moment where the hat like barely touches the top of his hairline, and it's like, Gryffindor. They're both very sad to see Meeks and Pitts depart into Ravenclaw, but at least, you know, they all have each other, and they all saw this coming anyway. They're all gonna see each other outside of class, you know, on those trips to Hogsmeade. When Cameron's name is called, he saunters up to the stool like, Ravenclaw, here I come. And then the Sorting Hat says Slytherin, and he's like, oh, huh. And then Todd's name is called, and he goes up, and all eyes are on him. No, Todd's favorite place to be, the absolute center of attention. The Sorting Hat is placed on his head, and because the Sorting Hat is a sadistic little shit, and because Todd's the main character more or less, we have to go into this whole deliberation on what Todd could possibly be. He's immediately like, well, you're not a Slytherin, that's for damn sure. And everyone laughs, and Todd dies a little on the inside. And remembering what he heard back on the train, he's like, okay, well, I'm not cool, so I'm not a Gryffindor, and I guess I'm pretty Hufflepuffy, but hey, maybe the Sorting Hat will think I'm smart and put me in Ravenclaw. Todd surveys the hall, and for whatever reason, his eyes just kind of drift wistfully towards the Gryffindor table, like, oh, if only I were like them. His gaze lands on Neil, who gives him just a small little reassuring smile. And it's the first time in a long time that anybody's smiled at Todd in like a positive way. His heart flutters a bit and he kind of sits a little taller, a little straighter up in that stool, like, oh yes, hello Neil Perry. The Sorting Hat suddenly booms out, well that settles it, he's a Gryffindor. Todd nearly jumps out of his skin. He is shooketh. If you couldn't tell, Todd is basically Neville Longbottom. Then he makes the trek over the Gryffindor table. Charlie grabs him by the shoulders and forces him to sit between himself and Neil. Neil shakes his hand and introduces himself and smiles once more, and Todd is basically now in a profound 11-year-old's version of love. The next one we're doing is a college AU. Everybody involved is at NYU because I'm obsessed with NYU, and it's not because I applied to NYU and then got waitlisted and rejected. Nope, that never happened. I'm definitely not still salty about it. Psh. Anyway, Neil's studying theater because duh. He's in his freshman year and he's in a new dorm with a new roommate who we will get to. In his first semester at college, Neil is cast as one of the lead roles in a new play. Woo! Directed by Mr. Keating. But oddly enough, the play was written anonymously, and Mr. Keating is the only person who really knows who the writer is, but he says it was written by a student, but they want to remain anonymous, and I'm going to respect that. This is low-key an outrage for Neil because as he's reading it, he's like, this play is crazy. It's dark, but also funny, but it's gay. It's so gay. I'm not going to get too much into the details of the play. I'll save that for when I actually write out the fanfiction. But basically, Neil and Ginny Danbury, another theater student, play twin siblings who fall in love with the same guy, played by our boy Charlie Nawanda Dalton. No more Mr. Future Banker, biatch. Basically, in the play, Ginny's character goes absolutely crazy and tries to kill Neil's character. I should probably give these characters names. Neil is playing a guy named William, Ginny's character is named Emily, and Charlie's character is named George. Emily goes insane and almost kills William, but then instead plunges a knife into her own chest. Also, she might kill her dad? I don't know. I'll work it out. It's not important. One day, Neil is trying to memorize lines and he enlists the help of his roommate, Todd. But when Neil hands him the scene, Todd kind of does a double take looking at it, and he's like, what play is this? Who is it by? Neil just says, I don't really know who wrote it. The only person who seems to know is our director, Mr. Keating, but he said that the play was anonymously written by a student who goes here, so your guess is as good as mine. So Todd kind of gets over his strangely adverse reaction to seeing this play, and at one point he's just like, gosh, is the director not gonna let you ad-lib because these lines really aren't that good? Neil's 99% sure that whoever wrote this play is his soulmate, so he's like, shut up, fuck you. Todd, of course, gets all, quiet and apologetic, like, I'm sorry, I just didn't know that this play in particular was so important to you. Neil kind of softens a bit, and he's like, okay, well, I'm sorry for getting so aggressive, but like, this play is absolutely brilliant. I overreacted because you judged it without knowing it in its entirety. So of course, Neil delves into the full story for the next 10 to 15 minutes. He gets extremely animated about it, as you can imagine, and by the end of it, Todd's like, wow, you make it sound really interesting. Neil's like, yeah, because it is interesting, you heathen. So this continues for a couple of weeks with Todd helping Neil memorize his lines, Neil trying to persuade Todd to like the play. He's like, okay, you're an English major, I want to hear the technicalities of why you think this play is so bad. Todd's like, well, for one thing, I don't like that the only female character in it goes crazy and stabs herself. Neil's eyes light up. He's like, oh, we were actually discussing that in class about how like it's kind of a commentary on society's expectations that the only way that a woman can fulfill herself is through the other, like the opinions of men around her. So when she ultimately loses the respect of her brother, her love interest, her father, she just completely like shuts down, practically combusts as a person. Todd just kind of stares at him, gets a hint of a smile on his face, and then drops the subject. There's one account where they're practicing, I don't know, in Central Park or somewhere like that, somewhere nice and romantic. Neil's being all crazy and over the top, and Todd's like dying on the inside because all these people are walking by looking at them, and Neil's like, you just have to sound your barbaric yup! And just day after day, in cafes, in Central Park, in bookstores, they're just rehearsing these lines, and at one point it's, you know, Neil has the entire play fully memorized, even the scenes that he's not in. Kind of just turns into an excuse to hang out with his roommate, who he lives with, so he doesn't really need an excuse, but whatever. There are even a few times when Neil wants to practice some of the more romantic scenes. They do the romantic scenes a couple of times, and of course there's kissing involved, but Todd isn't even an actor, so he can't very well expect him to want to engage in that sort of thing. There's just one day when it's cold out and it's so cozy inside, and Neil and Todd are sitting on the bed together, sharing a blanket, and they're delivering these lines, and Neil just kind of gets lost and derails into his own dialogue. I feel like I can truly be myself around you, and I've never felt that way with anybody before. You know the tropes, okay? He gets into all of them. I'll write it better when I actually write the fanfic. Todd's like, whoa, you ad-libbed. Do you think your director will let you keep that in? Because that was actually kind of good. That's kind of just Todd's defense mechanism for like, oh god, feelings, what are they? Where are they coming from? But Neil just ignores all that and leans in and kisses Todd. Woo, gay boys! So they're dating for a few weeks, and Neil asks Todd to come to the performance of the play. He's like, I know you don't like the play, and you've basically already read the entire thing, so you know what happens, but I promise you the cast is great, and it would really, really mean a lot to me if you showed up. So Todd does. The performance is stellar. Neil does amazing, so do Ginny and Charlie and everybody involved. And then afterwards, all of the actors are backstage, and Neil kind of drags Todd backstage with him to meet all of the cast. Everybody, this is my roommate, Todd. He also doubles as my date. Neil's loud and boisterous voice kind of carries across the backstage area all the way to our one and only John Keating. Keating kind of looks up and his eyes light up when he sees Todd. Todd's giving him one of these, like, don't you dare, bitch, don't you dare. But Keating strolls up like, oh, Todd, wonderful. It's so great to see you. I'm so glad you came to see the performance. Ladies, gentlemen, non-binary members of the ensemble, I would like to introduce to you your playwright, Todd Anderson. Bet you didn't see that one coming. Basically, Neil's head just explodes. Grabs Todd and starts shaking him slightly, like, why wouldn't you tell me that you wrote this show? Why, if you wrote the show, do you hate it so much? It's brilliant. What's wrong with you? You're my soulmate. Our boy is just slightly on the dramatic side. Todd just kind of shrugs and smiles, and he's like, well, I like it a lot better. Christ on a bike! I do like it a lot better when there are people performing it, particularly, you know, when you're in it. All of Neil's frustration just kind of melts away, and Todd comes to the cast party afterwards. Woo woo woo! We love a cast party. This last one is a cheeks fic. Woo, we're switching it up. I wanted to focus on Charlie and his saxophone because I think his talents are grossly underappreciated. Also, I feel like even if the saxophone scene hadn't happened in the movie, if you'd asked me, like, you know, what's a musical instrument that embodies each of these boys' souls, my first answer would be that Charles Nwanda Dalton is a motherfucking saxophone. Also, Cameron is of course a clarinet, Neil's a piccolo, Todd is a violin, Pitts is an upright bass, Meeks is a cello, Knox is an oboe, Chris is an acoustic guitar, and Ginny is a harp. Don't at me on this. Just kidding, please at me, I'm lonely. So I feel like in Charlie's bedroom, either at his house or at Welton, it just looks like a calamity happened. Like there are clothes strewn all over the place, the bed is unmade, there are questionable stains on the sheets that we won't get into, there are cigarette butts and ashes everywhere. But then if you looked underneath his bed, all you would find is a black case, and if you open that black case, you would find a beautiful golden saxophone, polished to perfection, not a scratch on it. And that's exactly what Meeks finds one day when he all but breaks into Charlie and Cameron's room because Charlie borrowed a textbook and Meeks needs it back. he kind of just opens it up on the bed, and he's awestruck. He's like, this is such a beautiful instrument. Does Charlie play? How could I have not known about this? As luck would have it, Charlie walks in on him doing this and nearly has a heart attack. Meeks, of course, explains that he was looking for his textbook and then says, I didn't know you played, Nwanda. Charlie kind of has to snap himself out of this because this is his deep, dark secret that he's never told anybody, and suddenly this adorable red-headed friend of his is looking at his saxophone and he's like, my worlds are colliding. That's how he is on the inside. On the outside, he's like, yes, the saxophone. The first lady I ever fell in love with. Oh, does this lady have a name? Charlie says, why yes, of course. Her name is Saxy, the sexy saxophone. Dear God, Nwanda, how old were you when you came up with that name? 5? I'll have you know, I was 6. Charlie didn't actually get his saxophone until he was 12, but he's had the name picked out. This was kind of his dream for his entire childhood. They continue their visit for a couple minutes, then Meeks grabs his textbook and dips out, and Charlie has an obsessive little freak out and starts cleaning his saxophone even though Meeks didn't really touch it. Meanwhile, Meeks is having like a Javert-esque existential crisis over the fact that Charlie plays the saxophone and he's focused on it enough with his short attention span, and he cares about it enough to bring it to school with him, yet he hides it from everybody. The next class that he has with Mr. Keating, Meeks shares a sonnet, because we all know our boy Stephen Meeks is an absolute slut for a sonnet. It was about an encounter that Meeks had with this parrot in the middle of the jungle. When all of the other birds were around, the parrot would just squawk noisily, and with this squawking, like bird noise, Meeks also heard like firecrackers and party noisemakers, like and all of these other crazy cacophonous sounds. But then one day, Meeks found the parrot by himself in the middle of the jungle, and he was singing, and with these little, bird chirps, Meeks also heard symphonies and sonatas and the most beautiful music that he's ever heard. But when the parrot saw Meeks watching him, he stopped singing and flew away. Don't ask me how Meeks crams this all into 14 lines, okay? The boy's a genius. The poem is very well received by the class. Even Mr. Keating comes up and gives our little Stephen boy a little pat on the back, and he's like, good job, this is your best work yet, I'd say. And Charlie, oh boy, Charlie, can you say heart eyes? He knows he's the parrot, obviously. Just because he nearly flunked English the previous year does not make him a complete moron. Also, the boy has a bit of an ego, so he has a tendency to think that everything is about him, but this one he knows. He finds that he quite likes the idea of Stephen thinking about him, even though this isn't anything new. Charlie's been in love with Meeks for like 3 years, trying to repress those feelings, but boy, are they bubbling to the surface. He asks Meeks to accompany him to the Indian cave one day. Just the two of them. Meeks agrees and goes to the cave, and he's, full of nerves and excitement, and when he goes into the cave, he sees that there is a picnic basket on the ground. Oh my god, my dream guy made me a picnic? What? Dream guy? What? Who said that? Charlie emerges from the shadows, saxophone strapped to his neck, and starts playing the most enchanting, sultry melody that Meeks has ever heard. On any other day, probably in the presence of all of their friends, Meeks would have given, a very silly applause. All our boy Meeks can do is just stare at Charlie in absolute awe and say, that was beautiful. You're beautiful. What? Who said that? Charlie, bless his heart, says, well, I thought that the first girl I ever loved could help me express my feelings for the first boy I ever loved. And, when Meeks hears Charlie say that, what exactly is he supposed to do besides grab him by the front of the shirt and kiss him? In the book Dead Poets Society, as well as probably the first draft of the screenplay, Charlie at one point refers to the Indian cave as the Charles Dalton Cave for passionate experimentation, so, I'm just gonna leave that there. It's getting steamy in here. If I had a tie, I would loosen it. Anyway, that's everything for now. I will eventually someday have this stuff up on AO3. But once again, guys, I've really, really appreciated all of the likes and reblogs and all of the comments everywhere. The comments in particular mean a lot to me, so thank you so much. You're all so wonderful. Carpe that ass. See you around.